I'm going to speak for maybe 15 to 20 minutes about some of the challenges that we're facing at the moment in government as we look to not just the challenges of tomorrow but also the challenges of the future. And a lot of my job as Minister for Housing, Planning and Local Government is directly involved in construction. The housing element, obviously planning, local government, obviously there's Irish Water as well and water infrastructure, and even things like severe weather events where people have been delayed getting on site this year because of things like Storm Emma. And all of these figure into the type of work that we're doing at the moment. I do want to recognise two of my colleagues here, Councillor Higgins and Councillor Lawler, and also I think the new chair of the Housing Agency, Michael Carey, is here as well, and to acknowledge him. This summit is happening at a very good time, if you like, for Ireland when we talk about construction, because Ireland is building again. The state is building again. Now we know that capital investment was cut in the crisis. It was cut to save current expenditure. Decisions were made at the time for social cohesion, to keep our country together, that to be able to pay the day-to-day bills, people's paychecks in the state, people working in state services, capital spending was cut. But as the economy has recovered, capital spending has increased again. And now that the books are balanced, now that this year we will eliminate our deficit, we are in a position to prudently increase capital investment quite dramatically. And it's necessary to do that at the moment to increase the capacity of our economy, but it's also necessary when we look at some of the challenges that we're facing. One of the most immediate challenges that we face and that we talk about on a daily basis is the challenge of Brexit. And we don't yet know what that might mean for the country, but obviously when we look ahead to some of the risks that it poses to our economy and to our country, investments will have to be made to mitigate those risks. Another challenge that we face is in relation to the environment, in relation to climate change. Right now, there is almost a continent of plastics floating around the Asian Pacific Ocean. It's about the size of Spain, Portugal and France together. That's not their problem, it's our problem. And we need to make sure that as we look to the future, when we look to investment and investment of infrastructure in particular, that we have the environment in mind when we do that. Another challenge that we face is technology. Right now we are living through a technological revolution akin to the Industrial Revolution, and we don't yet know where it's going to take us. But when we look at things like artificial intelligence, drone technology, automation, shared living, all of those different changes that are happening as a result of technology, virtual reality, augmented reality, it's going to have quite a disruptive impact on our economy and on our country. And indeed, it's going to have an influence on some of the infrastructure and investment choices that we have to make. So all of those things are challenges that we need to consider today as we look to the future. But even if we weren't facing those particular challenges, those perhaps more existential challenges as a country, we do face that challenge of demographics. Right now, our country's population is growing faster than any other country in the European Union. More than 100,000 of our sons and daughters have returned to our country since the economic crisis because of the recovering economy. And that too has put severe pressures on our housing system, notwithstanding the housing shortage that was already there. By 2040, we anticipate an additional 1 million people will be living in the Republic of Ireland. That's 6 million people living in the Republic, and it's 8 million people living on the island of Ireland. And we haven't had those kinds of numbers on the island of Ireland since famine time. So it is quite a significant and dramatic increase in our population. So we have to answer questions like, where are these people going to live? Because that kind of population growth will require at the very least 550,000 new homes across the country. How will they live? We're going to need to create at least net 660,000 new jobs for those people to work in. 1 in 4 of our population by 2040 will be over the age of 65. 1 in 6 will be under the age of 15. And roughly, depending on what you read, 2/3 of the jobs for people who are born today that they will work in 2040 haven't even been invented yet. And these are the challenges that we face today as a country. And if we're smart, we'll see them as opportunities and we'll grasp them. Rather than turning away from them or trying to bury our heads in the sand, we'll turn towards those challenges, turn towards those opportunities. And in facing them, we'll define them, but also we'll define ourselves and redefine our country. And that's what Project Ireland 2040, which was launched earlier by the government this year, is all about. And I'm going to come back to that very shortly, because we do, of course, face more immediate challenges when we talk about our country and we talk about our society. And one of those challenges that is most immediate is the challenge of housing and house building. And I suppose that challenge is most difficult and is most pressing when we look at homelessness and we look at the number of families who are living in hotels in our country today. And it's absolutely unacceptable that any one family would have to live in a hotel. And that is why we talk about a crisis in homelessness, but it's also why the government places such a priority on building new homes. And this is very different from the challenges that we were facing in housing only very recently in our history, where there was a 90% fall in the construction of homes, where the house prices across the country fell by 50% in some instances, where hundreds of thousands of people were plunged into negative equity. Employment in construction fell by almost 2/3. And we had the legacy of 3,000 ghost estates and local authorities with huge land debt. That happened only very recently in our history. Now we face a different picture altogether. A huge shortage in housing supply needs to be tackled, and tackled very quickly. And so the government's response to that shortage, because of the broken housing sector that we have, is to rebuild our housing sector and to rebuild Ireland. And we call that programme Rebuilding Ireland. It involves a $6 billion investment by the taxpayer in social housing, but also a dedicated programme to rebuild our sector and to rebuild the supply chain. Not necessarily how it was, but to build it in new ways to protect us from making the mistakes of the past. All of the supply indicators that we look at today are trending very positively. Commencement notices, 18,500 new homes had commencement notices filed. That's 41% up on the 12-month period to February of this year. 20,800 planning permissions for new homes were granted over the course of 2017. That's a 27% increase on the previous year. If we look at ESB connections, which are new builds but also homes that have been vacant for more than 2 years, 20,000 ESB connections were completed in the 12th month of February. That's a 30% increase on the previous 12-month period. The CSO quarterly national accounts show that investment increased by 33% in residential construction in 2017, which was a very dramatic increase. It's one of the highest increases that we've ever recorded. And we look at the central bank estimates for new home construction in 2018. They estimated 23,000 new homes will be built this year, and as many as 27,000 new homes being built in 2019. These are dramatic increases on what we've seen before, and very dramatic increases given the reduction in house building that happened as a result of the financial crisis. And if they come to pass, if we are successful in achieving these numbers, it will show that Rebuilding Ireland is not only working, but it's getting us there ahead of schedule. We've also seen increases in the labour market, which is up at least 14% in 2017 on 2016. And when we look at social housing output, coming from a very low base historically, yesterday I was opening a new scheme in Wicklow where they haven't built homes. The local authority hasn't built homes for 16 years, and that's going to change quite dramatically over the coming years. But in 2017, social housing output in this country increased ×3 over 2016, and this year we'll double that number again. And both these supply streams are going to help people who are experiencing homelessness today, both the private side and the social side. But a huge amount of work was achieved in that regard in 2017. More than 2,000 families were exited out of hotels, the majority into homes, and 4,700 individuals exited homelessness. So progress is being made each week and each month, but we still face challenges when we talk about affordability. But I believe that some of these recent innovations that we've made in relation to planning will help in that area. We have new mechanisms for the use of state land, which will also help in affordability. And we have new taxpayer-supported affordability schemes, which were there in 2011, but of course were stood down because affordability wasn't an issue then when house prices had fallen so dramatically. So on the planning side, some of the things that we have been doing and which have been working to date are in relation to planning applications and the new fast-track planning process that came online in July of last year, shortly after I came into office. We've had 19 applications submitted so far, 15 decisions in favour, which have granted 1,600 new houses, 1,300 new apartments, and 3,600 new student beds. And each of those decisions were arrived at within 4 months of them being submitted, according to the new fast-track planning process for large building schemes. Currently, there are applications in for 600 new houses, 250 new apartments, and 480 new student beds, and they'll all be decided by July. Another innovation that we've brought in is the use of state resources to unlock key sites and get delivery on those sites more quickly. This is a project that we call LIHAF, which is an acronym for State Investment in Infrastructure. And the first iteration for LIHAF was 200 million of taxpayer-funded money to go into unlocking new sites more quickly. That 200 million, if we were to directly invest in a new house building, might get us about 1,000 homes. But by using investment with private side, with private land, local authorities and also public land, we're going to develop 30 projects across the state that are going to deliver 20,000 new homes just from that one funding stream alone by 2021 on sites that will have an eventual yield of 64,000 new homes. That means using taxpayers' money to bring in things like new roads, new bridges, and also new public amenities. And the state will deliver affordable homes on some of those sites that aren't delivering affordability directly themselves in terms of their supply. We also have the new Affordable Purchase Scheme, and I'll be issuing a second call for LIHAF under that second scheme later this week. Now, one of the key principles that we have in Project Ireland 2040, which is our 20-year plan for the future of this country, is compact growth. We know that how we have built in the past, predominantly 3-bedroom semi-detached homes sprawling around our cities, around our villages and our towns, hasn't worked for the country in terms of how the economy has grown and then actually started to strangle itself because of the type of growth. So compact growth is a key principle in Project Ireland 2040. 40% of all new homes being built in brownfield or infill sites. When we look to our 5 major cities and some of our regional drivers, those cities increasing in their cores by 50 to 60%. Very important principle if we're to look at things like not just taking advantage of our existing infrastructure, our existing economic investments, but also things like climate change and our carbon footprint. And one way that we can achieve this, one way we can achieve compact growth in our villages, towns and cities is by building apartments. We need to build tens of thousands of more apartments, particularly when we look at our capital and we look at Dublin. And recently I published new guidelines around apartment building to encourage more apartment building in the first instance, to incentivise the build to rent sector, which is going to be a very important part of our rental sector into the future, and to allow for new models of living, like co-living, which is very attractive now in some of the major cities, particularly around the younger workforces, younger professionals coming into work for the first time, wanting to live in the city, not needing a car, wanting to be able to walk to work, and not minding to share public space at home as they do at work in these new co-living opportunities that we're going to see. I've also sought to reduce costs in delivering apartments because it's very important that actually they are affordable to build so they can be affordable to buy and to rent. And that means removing things like car parking requirements in cities and in large towns where we have already existing or planned transport improvements. It means building more units per core, matching models that we have in other cities. It means a greater mix of homes, more 1- and 2-bed apartments, more studio apartments to cater for the changing demographics that we have in this country and the changing house formations that we're seeing over a period of years. And it also means allowing things for like reducing the dual aspect ratio. Again, what we see in other cities to make sure that we can have more affordable apartment building, but also apartment building that's attractive as well and homes that are attractive for people to live in. And in July, I will move to remove height restrictions in our major cities that are currently impeding some of that compact growth, some of that built-up development within our cities. We have these arbitrary height caps that make no sense, where on certain streets in Dublin today, you can build commercial to a certain height, but you can build residential to a lower height than that. It doesn't make sense, it's not good planning, it doesn't lead to good design. So in July we'll move to remove those height caps, and we can allow then cities like Dublin to grow upwards instead of outwards. And all of these measures that we are doing are going to then again reinforce these principles that we have under Project Ireland 2040, because that project is how we plan on tackling those challenges that we're going to confront over the next 20 years. And adaptation is a key part of that as well, making sure that we're flexible to adapt over the years as situations change. But Project Ireland 2040 begins with a 10-year capital investment plan of €116 billion over the coming 10 years between now and 2027. 116 billion investment in our roads, in our transport, in our health sector, in our education sector, and of course in house building as well. All of those necessary pieces of infrastructure that we need to put in place to accommodate our growing population, but also to protect us from some of the challenges that are out there. The assumption for that spending growth is a very prudent assumption. It assumes 2% on average growth per year over that 10-year period. We will probably grow, the economy will probably grow by more than that, but it's important that as we build and as we invest, again, we don't make the mistakes of the past by making spending investments or commitments that are based on imprudent assumptions about the economy, or that are based on improper reliance on cyclical taxation or those types of issues. So it is a very prudent plan for how we're going to spend our money into the future, because we cannot make the mistakes of the past. We're putting that plan together at the moment, and the plan itself is finalised, and that's just a start, but implementation, of course, is key. So how are we going to implement and how are we going to deliver the goals in Project Ireland 2040? Well, we have things like the new apartment guidelines, we have things like the LIHAV infrastructure funding, those types of measures that are already there in place to help us drive Project Ireland 2040. But very importantly, myself and Minister Paschal Donohoe have put together a delivery board to make sure that our planning at a strategic level is integrated. There's also going to be an investment projects and programme office established in the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform to coordinate all of the key state investments with private investment. And of course, there's also going to be a construction sector working group to make sure that all of the sectors that are involved in investing in our infrastructure and our economy are coordinated together. Funding under this will be key. So part of that flexibility that we want to drive and deliver under Project Ireland 2040 is, of course, we'll have certain plans and projects like a road that'll have a certain funding envelope ring-fenced around that. We have the funding envelope as well for the increase of 112,000 new homes on the social side that are going to be delivered between now and 2027. But to maintain some flexibility, we have an urban regeneration fund of about 2 billion, which will go for large towns and city centre sites to help them regenerate, to help get populations back into our city, town and village centres, as well as a 1 billion rural regeneration fund that will be run out of Michael Ring's Department for Rural Affairs. We'll have a £500 million fund for investments in climate mitigation and in the environment, and also a £500 million technology fund to help us make sure that we are ahead of the latest changes in technology and how they might actually disrupt but also improve our towns, villages and city centres. And those different funds are going to be activated later this year to help us begin some of that more dynamic planning around what we want to do with our country. Land is going to be a key part of this. The state has to become more directly involved in our key land banks. And what that means is, essentially a new regeneration agency by the state to take state lands and semi-state lands for site assembly, for new home building and new affordable home building. It'll also involve private land as well. And it's a very good, demonstration of where we're getting things wrong, very close to where we are here now. If you look at the Naas Road, as some of you would have driven to come out here this morning, it's a huge carriageway, a number of lanes connecting to the M50. It's got the canal right beside it. It's got the Lewis. All of these key pieces of infrastructure, but all of the land around it is used in a very inefficient way to sell couches and mattresses and cars and trucks within inside the M50. This is a key land bank, a key strategic land bank for the future of our city. If we're going to achieve compact growth, if we're going to take advantage of the existing pieces of infrastructure, achieve those economies of scale, and again, face down things like climate change and reducing our carbon footprint, we have to take land like that and we have to repurpose it into building houses, building workplaces, and all of the different things that are going to happen there. So the new regeneration agency is going to have a mandate to tackle some of those key challenges that we face into the future. And this work is happening now. On the 11th of May, there'll be a special Cabinet Away Day. I think it might be our third to look at issues around Project Ireland 2040, capital investment and housing, to flesh out these new initiatives that we are taking around the new agency and around the new funds so that we can get going on them as quickly as possible. And later this year, I'm going to establish a new office for a planning regulator. It's kind of amazing to think that we actually don't have one of these in the country today, given the problems that we've faced with planning in particular over the last number of decades. But later this year, I will set up a new office of a planning regulator who will be the independent check and balance on the government to make sure that we are delivering our plans as per the National Planning Framework in Project Ireland 2040. The local authorities and the regional assemblies are already developing their regional spatial economic strategies, which is the next tier down from Project Ireland 2040. And at the end of the year, when those strategies are in place, all of the county and city development plans will then have to follow in line with Project Ireland 2040. We're also later this year going to bring in legislation to make it more difficult for third parties that don't have an interest to object to planning applications, particularly when it comes to strategic planning infrastructure that's so important for the continued growth of our economy, but also to make sure that we can put in place all of the necessary things under Project Ireland 2040, like those new homes that need to be built and those new schools and those new pieces of strategic infrastructure. So these are more important changes that are coming down the line to make sure that as we invest €116 billion of taxpayers' money into the economy, we can do it efficiently and we can do it in the right way. And so just to conclude, as we stand here today, we have come through a very difficult economic period for our country, but the books are now being balanced by the government. Our unemployment rate has gone from one of the highest to now just under 6%, I think, as of today, which is very low, but we're going to drive it lower still. We have huge upheaval previously in terms of our residential sector, but now all of the indicators are pointing to a dramatic increase in housing supply on the private side and on the social side. And as those homes are built, it's going to mean a lot for people who are currently struggling, of course, in homelessness, but also people who are struggling to afford the rent or to afford to buy their homes as well. So we recognise that the economy has recovered. And what we need to do as a government is two things. We have to protect that recovery. So as we invest and build into the future, do it in a prudent way that doesn't repeat the mistakes of the past and doesn't risk our livelihoods again as it did in the past. But the second thing we have to do is we have to repair some of the wounds that were inflicted through that financial crisis. We have to recover our society as well. And that very important work that we're doing around house building, that principle of the state building social housing again that we have taken back as a government is very important in that work, to making sure that we are providing for those people who need our help the most. That is key to our vision under Rebuilding Ireland. It's also key to our vision under Project Ireland 2040. We don't do it alone. The state doesn't act alone. There are a number of different stakeholders involved in this, and you are here today because you are key stakeholders in Rebuilding Ireland and in Project Ireland 2040. And some of those new implementation groups that are being established at the moment are the most important way in which we can make sure that we can deliver on our responsibilities together in a coordinated fashion. And I hope to see great progress over the rest of this year and, of course, into next year and beyond. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak, and good luck with your conference. Thank you.